they say the older you get, the more invisible you become. At first, I thought it was just a figure of speech. Until I found myself sitting in a silent living room 2 days before Christmas, staring at 2 suitcases packed with gifts that no one would ever open. I was a mother, a grandmother, a woman who had given everything she had to keep her only daughter's world spinning. But that winter I finally learned a hard truth. Love without boundaries doesn't make you indispensable, makes you disposable. This isn't a story about revenge in the way you'd expect. There are no dramatic confrontations, no grand speeches, no slammed doors. But there is a woman, me, who spent 65 years giving, only to be told that her presence was inconvenient. And there is a moment, a single text message that unraveled it all. You'll hear about the lie they told, the Christmas that never happened, and the silence that became my strength. But more than anything, this is the story of how I finally stopped being just a good mother, and started being Amanda. My name is Amanda Clark. I live in a quiet 1-bedroom apartment just outside Portland, where the winters are cold, but the skies are always a soft shade of gray that reminds me of childhood. I retired 3 years ago, after working as a bookkeeper for over 3 decades. Nothing glamorous, just rows of numbers, steady paychecks, and long evenings spent at the kitchen table balancing other people's lives. I never married. My daughter Emily was my whole world. She came into my life when I was 35. Late, unexpected, but perfect. I raised her alone, juggling work and school plays, scraped knees and late-night fevers. And when she grew up and married James, a man I once thought was decent, I did what mothers do. I gave money, time, energy, my entire retirement savings. I helped them buy their home. I sent $4,000 every month like clockwork. When their son Mason was born, I became the babysitter, the night nurse, the emergency backup plan. And I never asked for anything in return. All I wanted was a seat at the table, a place in their lives, a little warmth during the holidays. So, when I called to confirm my visit that December, and Emily hesitated, when James took the phone and gently suggested I skip this Christmas because his parents were coming instead, something inside me cracked. But what shattered wasn't just my holiday plans. It was the illusion that love, real, unconditional love, was enough to keep a family together. What followed was a silence I never expected, and a realization that changed everything. Because sometimes the people you love the most are the very ones who teach you how to choose yourself. My name is Amanda Clark. I'm 65 years old. I live alone in a quiet apartment on the 2nd floor of a building that creaks a little in the wind and smells faintly of cinnamon and old wood. Most days are peaceful. I wake up early, feed the birds outside my window, make myself a cup of tea, and listen to the world slowly come to life. It's a simple life. Not extravagant, not lonely either. Just quiet. I spent over 30 years working as a bookkeeper at a local insurance firm. I wasn't rich, but I was steady. Saved, clipped coupons. I fixed torn clothes instead of buying new ones. I did what most single mothers do. I built a life with what I had, and I gave the best parts of it to my daughter, Emily. She was my everything. From the moment I first held her, I knew that no one else would ever come first. Not a man, not a dream, not even myself. And over the years, that promise turned into something more than just motherly love. It became a quiet contract, one I upheld even when no one asked me to. When Emily went to college, I sold my jewelry to help cover her tuition. When she married James, I offered the down payment for their first home, even though it meant dipping into the retirement fund I'd spent decades building. And when their son, Mason, was born, I didn't hesitate. I wired them $4,000 every single month. For formula, for rent, for daycare, for whatever they needed. No questions asked. No expectations. People would say, "Amanda, you're too generous." Or, "What if they start depending on you too much?" And I'd always reply the same way. "She's my daughter. What else would I do?" Because in my heart, helping Emily felt like breathing. Natural, effortless, necessary. But here's the thing they don't tell you about being the one who always gives. If you never draw a line, one day you'll wake up and realize you've disappeared. didn't happen all at once. There was no single moment when I felt unappreciated, unseen. It crept in slowly, disguised as habit, cloaked in duty, wrapped in the kind of love that forgets to ask, "Is anyone loving me back?" And by the time Christmas came around that year, I had no idea just how far I'd faded in their eyes. But I was about to find out. Because in just a few short days, a simple phone call from Emily would change everything. There's a certain kind of warmth that comes from being needed. When Emily and James first moved into their townhouse, they were just starting out. Young, hopeful, a little overwhelmed. The house was small, but to them it was everything. I remember the day they got the keys like it was yesterday. Emily threw her arms around me, tears in her eyes, and whispered, "Mom, thank you. This house, it's yours too. You'll always have a room here." James nodded beside her, quiet but sincere. "Your family, Amanda. Always welcome." I held on to those words like a warm blanket on a winter night. First, they meant it. Or maybe they thought they did. When Mason was born, I was there every other weekend. I cooked dinner, folded laundry, walked the baby in circles when he cried through the night. I didn't mind. In fact, I loved it. It made me feel useful, loved, included. Every now and then, Emily would send a short text. "Thanks again, Mom. We couldn't do this without you." And that was enough. A little thank you tucked at the end of a sentence, like a ribbon tied around a package I'd already paid for. But gratitude, real gratitude, doesn't fade when the gifts stop. It doesn't disappear when the money pauses or the favors aren't convenient. It shows up in the way you're treated when you have nothing left to offer. And slowly I began to notice. The texts got shorter, the phone calls less frequent. I was still sending $4,000 a month, but now it felt more like a bill being paid than a gift being given. The warmth that once filled our conversations had cooled into routine politeness. Once, I sent Mason a handmade quilt with his name stitched across the corner. Emily didn't mention it for days. When she finally did, she texted, "Oh, Mason liked the blanket. Thanks." No photo, no call, no excitement. I remember staring at that message, wondering when we'd stop seeing each other, not just with our eyes but with our hearts. And that's when I learned something. Sometimes, the illusion of being appreciated is more dangerous than being ignored. Because it convinces you to keep giving, long after your gifts have stopped being received with love. I told myself it was just stress, that life was busy, that they'd come around. But deep down I felt the shift. What I didn't know yet was that shift was about to become a sharp turn. Because as the holidays approached, I started preparing to visit. Bags packed, gifts wrapped, heart wide open. And then, the phone rang. It was 3 days before Christmas. I just finished packing the last of Mason's gifts. A soft dinosaur hoodie and a book about planets he'd been obsessed with. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon and bourbon cookies, my signature holiday treat. I'd even tucked a jar of roasted coffee beans into the corner of my suitcase, the fancy kind James liked from that little shop in Oregon. The bags were full. My heart even fuller. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing down my blouse. I'd bought it just for this trip. Cranberry red with tiny golden buttons, something festive but warm. I imagined Emily opening the door, Mason running into my arms, James joking about my grandma cookies like he always did. I could practically hear the laughter echoing in their kitchen. And then my phone rang. I saw Emily's name and smiled as I answered, already picturing her voice. But something was off. "Hey, Mom," she said too softly. Her tone didn't match the season. It wasn't cheerful or excited. It was careful, hesitant. Pause. "Is everything all right?" There was a long beat of silence. Yeah, nothing serious," she said too quickly. "I was just wondering. Did you already book your ticket?" I felt something tighten in my chest. "Of course. I'm all packed," I said gently. "Why?" Another pause. Then, "James wants to talk to you for a sec." Before I could ask anything more, he was on the line. "Hi there, Amanda," he began, his voice polite. Too polite. The kind of polite that hides something underneath. I held my breath. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," he said. "And this Christmas might not be the best time for a visit." It was like someone had opened a window and let in all the cold. He spoke in soft tones, masking the blow with pleasantries. Something about his parents coming. Something about them being light sleepers. "There just isn't enough space," he said. "We only have 3 bedrooms." I tried to offer solutions. I said I could sleep on the couch or even bring my own air mattress. I didn't need much, just a corner of the home I helped them build. But each offer was gently turned away. "It's going to be a bit chaotic," he added. "And we're really hoping to just have some quiet family time." Quiet family time. And just like that, I was no longer part of the family. It's funny, when you hear a door close, it doesn't always slam. Sometimes it clicks quietly, just enough to let you know you're on the wrong side of it. And in that moment, I realized something important. Being invited isn't the same as being wanted. And being wanted isn't the same as being respected. When Emily came back on the phone, her voice trembled. She tried to make it sound like it wasn't her decision. "It's just a tough year," she said. "Please don't be upset." But she didn't say, "Come anyway." She didn't say, "I want you here." She said nothing at all. That night, I sat in my quiet kitchen, staring at the wrapped gifts and the empty seat across from me. A seat that was supposed to be filled with stories, hugs, and holiday cheer. Instead, it was filled with silence. But silence has a way of revealing things that words try to cover. And the next morning, something else was revealed. Something I never saw coming. Because when I texted someone in the family to ask about James' parents, the truth came out. The next morning I woke up early the way I always do. But the usual rhythm of my routine felt wrong. My hands still brewed the coffee, but it tasted flat. The little birds outside my window chirped as they always did, but I couldn't bring myself to smile at them. My thoughts were heavy, circling the same question over and over. Why didn't they want me there? I tried to reason it out. Maybe James's parents were unwell. Maybe space really was an issue. Maybe they were simply overwhelmed. But deep down, a voice inside me whispered something colder. It wasn't about space. It was about you. That voice stayed with me as I sat on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, staring at my contact list. And then, I scrolled past a name I hadn't thought about in years. Lily Green, James's niece. We'd met once or twice at family gatherings. Polite girl. Always smiling. We'd exchanged numbers out of courtesy. Never really used them. I hesitated. Then I typed, "Hey Lily, just wondering. Do you know if James's parents are visiting for Christmas this year? I was thinking of inviting them over here if they're free." I added a smiley face to keep it casual, then hit send. My palms were sweating. I told myself not to expect an answer. But 10 minutes later my phone buzzed. Her reply was chipper, cheerful, innocent. "Hi Amanda. Oh, they're super excited to spend the holidays at James and Emily's. The whole family's going to be together. They even booked a trip to Hawaii after Christmas. So lucky, right?" Hawaii. The word hit me like a cold slap. Not just because of the destination, but because of what it meant. There was space. There was no illness. There was no sleeplessness or fragile parents. There was just a lie. They hadn't forgotten me. They'd replaced me. With lays and beaches and matching family swimsuits, probably. With toasts on a balcony and group selfies under a palm tree. And all the while, I'd been sitting in a cold kitchen, holding a tin of cookies no one would eat. It would have hurt less if they'd just told me the truth. But they didn't. Instead, they wrapped their rejection in fake concern, in carefully chosen words, in a performance rehearsed just enough to sound kind. That was the moment I stopped feeling sad. And started feeling something else entirely. Betrayal. Because here's what I've learned. When someone lies to protect your feelings, they're protecting their own comfort. Not your heart. The lie isn't just about where they were going. It's about what they thought I deserved to know. And clearly, in their eyes, I didn't deserve much. That night I didn't cry. I didn't call. I didn't rage. I sat in the quiet, let the silence settle around me like snowfall, and began to think clearly for the first time in a long time. Because if I wasn't good enough to join them in paradise, maybe it was time to stop sending lifeboats to people who'd already set sail without me. And so, without a word, I made a decision. That month's $4,000. I wasn't sending it. I didn't say anything. No angry message. No dramatic farewell. I didn't even hint that I knew the truth. But when my bank app sent me the usual monthly notification, scheduled transfer to Emily Clark, $4,000, I didn't tap confirm. I just swiped it away. Not out of spite. Not because I wanted them to suffer. But because, for the first time in years, I wanted to see something clearly. Would they notice me, without the money? Would they miss me? Or just the help I gave? You see, $4,000 a month was never just a number. It was baby formula. It was mortgage payments. It was groceries and diapers and daycare and new shoes when Mason outgrew the old ones. It was the quiet safety net beneath their lives. The one I built, stitch by stitch, even when I had to cut corners on my own. I'd never missed a single month. Not when I had the flu. Not when my own heating bill came in higher than expected. Not even when inflation made my fixed income stretch thinner than ever. Because mothers don't miss. They show up. They hold on. They give. But now I had to know. Had I become nothing more than a direct deposit? The days passed slowly. Christmas came and went. Snow blanketed the porch. The wreath I used to hang with Mason stayed in its box this year. My little tree sat undecorated by the window, waiting for a holiday that never really arrived. And then, 5 days after the usual transfer date, my phone rang. It was Emily. Her voice, soft and sweet at first, danced around small talk. "Hi Mom, how've you been? It's been cold lately. Are you staying warm?" She asked about the birds, about my tea, about the weather. But I knew what she was waiting for. And sure enough, a few minutes in, her voice shifted. Too casual. "Oh, by the way, did you forget to send this month's money?" There it was. I paused just long enough to let the silence stretch, and then I smiled. Not bitterly, just calmly. "I didn't forget," I said. There was a beat of silence on her end. Then, "Oh, okay. Is everything all right?" I let my voice stay gentle. "Everything's fine. I just thought, with the holidays and your in-laws around, maybe you didn't need it this month. I figured you'd have plenty of support." Another pause. Her tone grew strained, but still controlled. "Mom, we're counting on that money. You can't just stop without telling me." I looked out the window at the snowfall dusting the porch railing and said quietly, "You stopped telling me things too, sweetheart. You didn't tell me about Hawaii. You didn't tell me you didn't want me at Christmas." Silence. I continued, soft but steady. "I just thought maybe this was the right moment to step back. Let you live your life your way. And here's the truth I learned in that moment. People who truly value you will reach for your heart when your hands are empty. The rest, they only reach when they need something." That $4,000 wasn't just a payment. It was a mirror. And when I took it away, I saw the reflection for what it really was. But that wasn't the end. Because just when I thought the silence was enough to speak volumes, James called. And this time he wasn't sweet. He wasn't polite. He was furious. "Before we go any further, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever felt like you gave everything to someone, your time, your love, your support, only to realize they only valued what you gave, not you? If this story touches something in your heart, please take a moment to share it in the comments below. Whether it's one sentence or a memory you've never told anyone, your voice matters. You're not alone, and your story might just help someone else feel seen. Now back to Amanda. James didn't start with a greeting. No "Hi, Amanda." No "Hope you're well." Just a sharp, clipped, "What's this supposed to mean?" I held the phone to my ear and stayed quiet for a moment, letting him fill the silence with his own tension. "You think you can just stop helping us without saying a word?" he snapped. "Emily's been crying for days. You're using money to manipulate her? Is that it?" His voice cracked with anger, the kind that bubbles up not from heartbreak, but from inconvenience. It was strange. hearing him so furious, when just weeks ago he'd asked me not to visit, as if I were some unwanted guest. And now I was essential again, but only because the direct deposit didn't show up. I took a breath, calm and steady. "James," I said softly, "I'm not using money to manipulate anyone. I'm just choosing not to give something that no longer feels welcome." He scoffed. "That's rich coming from someone who always said she was doing this out of love." "And I did," I replied. "But love shouldn't feel like a subscription. You don't get to ask me to disappear, then demand I keep paying for the privilege." That's when the words started pouring out of him, hot and sharp like spilled coffee. "You think you're some kind of saint? You're not. My parents paid for the renovations on this house. You didn't build our life, we did. You just wanted control." Control. That word hit me harder than I expected. Because for years, I'd bent over backwards to avoid controlling anything. I never questioned how they spent the money. Never gave advice unless asked. Never once told Emily how to raise her child, how to run her home, how to live her life. But in James's eyes, my giving had never been kindness. Had been a transaction. Power play. An intrusion. And here's the heartbreaking truth I learned that day. To someone who wants to take without gratitude, your love will always feel like pressure, even when it's offered with open hands. Could have shouted. I could have listed every sacrifice. The nights I paced the floor with baby Mason so they could sleep. The down payment that drained my savings. The holidays I spent alone so they could have space. But I didn't. Because arguing with someone who already decided you're the villain never changes the script. They just get louder. So I let him finish. I let him spit out every last resentment he'd been storing. And when he finally went quiet, his breath ragged on the other end, I said, "You and Emily have made it clear. I'm not part of your family anymore. And that's okay. I'm not angry. I'm just done pretending." And then, in the softest voice I've ever used, I added, "There won't be another check. There won't be another conversation like this. You don't have to worry about me showing up, or interfering, or giving." Silence. I think he expected rage, guilt, plea. Instead he got peace. But not long after I hung up, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Emily. And when I read her message, I realized that sometimes the people you love the most won't defend you. Not because they don't care, but because they're too scared to rock the boat they're sitting in. After I hung up that day, I turned my phone off. Not just to silence the noise, but to quiet something deeper. The part of me that had spent years bracing for approval, hoping for validation that never came. I sat by the window with a cup of lukewarm tea and watched the snow fall slowly, blanketing everything in soft white silence. For the first time in decades, there was no one calling me Mom in need of something. No list of groceries to send, no bills to cover, no baby to rock to sleep. Just me. Alone but not broken. I'll be honest. At first, the quiet felt unbearable. I didn't know what to do with all the space they'd left behind. But sometimes what feels like an empty house is actually a blank canvas. So I started small. I rearranged the furniture. Hung up a painting I'd kept in the closet for years because Emily once said it was too bold. I opened the sewing kit that had gathered dust in the hallway cabinet and stitched new covers for the throw pillows on my couch. And on a chilly Thursday morning, I walked down to the community center and signed up to volunteer. Once a week, teaching beginner sewing to young women who'd never threaded a needle before. Their faces lit up when I taught them how to repair a torn seam. They called me Miss Amanda, and they listened. Not because they needed money, but because they valued what I knew. It was the first time in years that I felt seen for who I was, not for what I gave. And it reminded me of something I had long forgotten. You are more than what others take from you. You are allowed to create a life that doesn't revolve around their needs. Of course, I still thought about them. Some nights, I'd catch myself wondering if Mason was warm enough. If Emily remembered how much cinnamon he liked on his apples. If James had calmed down or was still shouting into rooms that no longer listened. But I didn't reach out. Because healing doesn't always mean going back. Sometimes it means going forward alone if you have to. I made a quiet promise to myself. If they ever came back to me, not for money but for me, the door would be open. Not because I was waiting, but because I had nothing left to prove. And nothing left to lose. And then, nearly a month later, just as winter began to loosen its grip, there was a knock at my door. It was a Friday evening just past dusk. I'd come in from the balcony, arms full of laundry I'd hung out to dry, when I heard the knock. It wasn't rushed or loud, just hesitant, like someone asking permission to be heard before they even spoke. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, walked to the door, and peeked through the peephole. There she was, Emily. Hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles beneath her eyes. She wore a faded puffer jacket zipped to her chin and clutched a canvas bag that looked like it had been packed in a hurry. Open the door. She didn't speak right away, just stood there, trembling ever so slightly in the cold. Then, with a voice that sounded much smaller than I remembered, she said, "Mom, can I come in?" I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I simply stepped aside. She walked in slowly, like someone not sure if they were welcome or intruding. She didn't take off her coat, didn't set down her bag. She just stood in the middle of my living room, holding herself together like she might fall apart if she moved too quickly. And then, in a whisper, "I can't do it anymore." Her eyes were glassy, her words barely audible. "James left," she said. "He lost his job again. Slammed a plate on the floor and told me I was useless. That you were useless." Then he dropped divorce papers on the table and walked out. He paused, breathing hard. It started after the money stopped. He unraveled. I didn't interrupt. I didn't say, "I told you so." I just listened because that's what mothers do. She swallowed hard. "I know you're tired of me, Mom. I know I don't deserve to be here. I'm not asking for money. I didn't know who else to call." She looked up at me, desperate and afraid. And in that moment something shifted. This wasn't the daughter who dismissed me. This wasn't the woman who chose silence over truth. This was a girl, my girl, finally facing the cost of everything she once ignored. I walked over to the couch, patted the seat beside me. "Come sit. We have time." She moved slowly, sitting at the far edge like a guest, not family. I didn't push her to talk. I didn't need to. Because soon the words poured out, halting, tear-soaked, raw. She told me about Mason's fever. About bills she couldn't pay. About nights spent crying in silence so her son wouldn't hear. And then, in the quietest voice I'd ever heard from her, she said, "Mom, sorry. For not standing up for you. For letting him treat you like a stranger. I was scared. I thought if I kept the peace I could keep the marriage. But I lost you in the process. And now, I finally understand what you gave." Tears rolled down her face as she whispered, "I didn't just lose my husband. I almost lost the only person who ever truly loved me." I wrapped my arms around her, not tightly, just enough for her to know she wasn't alone anymore. And here's what I learned that night. Sometimes, it takes losing everything for someone to finally see the people who were holding them up the whole time. Emily didn't return with demands. She didn't come back with entitlement or excuses. She came back with truth. And in that truth, something precious was born. Not a return to what we were, but the fragile beginning of something better. But rebuilding, I knew, wouldn't be easy. Forgiveness is a doorway. But trust, that's a road. And in the days that followed, we would learn how to walk it. Slowly, quietly, together. In the days that followed Emily's return, the house was quieter than usual. Not the kind of silence that used to ache with absence, but the kind that feels like breathing space, like something new is trying to grow. She stayed in the guest room. Didn't unpack much. Just a small bag by the dresser, a toothbrush in the bathroom, and that old scarf I'd knitted for her years ago, finally folded at the foot of the bed. Funny. It was the same scarf she once called too childish. Now she clung to it like something sacred. She didn't ask for money. Didn't open the fridge and comment on how boring my food was. She washed her own dishes. Tidied her own room. asked if I needed anything before running errands. But more importantly, she asked me how I was. "Are you sleeping okay, Mom? Did your knees bother you after gardening today?" Little things. But to me they were everything. One night, after Mason had fallen asleep on the couch with a picture book on his chest, she sat beside me with her hands wrapped around a mug of chamomile tea. "I know this isn't forever," she said softly. "And I don't want it to be. I need to figure my life out. I want you to know I'm trying." I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I saw not the girl who needed saving, but a woman who wanted to stand. And so I told her the truth, calm, kind, but firm. "Emily," I said, "you're my daughter, not my dependent. This house isn't a shelter from the world. It's a resting place. You're welcome here, but this time, the path forward is yours to walk." She nodded slowly, eyes glistening with quiet understanding. And in that moment, without signing anything or shaking hands, we made a new kind of contract, a silent agreement between two grown women who once forgot how to see each other clearly. This was no longer a relationship based on guilt or obligation. It wasn't about favors exchanged for love. It was about presence, respect, boundaries, about giving without being emptied, and receiving without feeling entitled. We agreed. I would help where I could, but I wouldn't carry her life on my back. She would work toward independence, not just survival. And most importantly, we'd talk. Not just when things were falling apart, but even in the in-between moments when nothing seemed urgent, but everything still mattered. Because love without communication becomes assumption. An assumption left unchecked becomes resentment. That week she went to 3 job interviews. Came home exhausted but not defeated. I didn't ask about the details. I just handed her a plate of dinner and said, "Eat. You've got another one tomorrow." And she smiled, tired but proud. For the first time in our lives, we were finally standing beside each other. Not one in front, dragging the other behind. But even as we built this new rhythm, we both knew there was one final step left. Not just healing, but letting go. 2 months later, on a sunny afternoon in early spring, Emily came into the kitchen with a folded piece of paper in her hand. She looked more rested these days. Her voice was steadier, her steps more sure. There was a calm in her I hadn't seen since before the wedding. Maybe even before Mason was born. She placed the paper on the table. "I signed a lease," she said. "A small apartment near Mason's school. Just 2 rooms, but it has a tiny balcony with space for plants." I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I simply smiled and nodded. "Are you sure?" She looked me in the eye, and this time there was no hesitation. "Yes, I'm ready." And I believed her. She didn't ask for help with the deposit. Didn't expect me to co-sign. She had her name on the lease, her plan in place, and her heart finally in the right hands, her own. We packed her things quietly that weekend. Mason ran around the apartment, hugging everything he thought he'd miss. My rocking chair, the cookie tin, even the ceramic bird by the window. When it was time to leave, I walked them to the door. Emily hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on myself." I smiled gently and said, "I didn't save you, sweetheart. You saved yourself. I just stayed long enough for you to remember how." Then Mason hugged me too, his tiny arms wrapping around my waist. "Grandma," he said, "can I still draw you pictures for your fridge?" I laughed softly. "Only if you promise to sign your name big so I can brag about the artist." And just like that they were gone. No drama, no tears, just a quiet closing of the door. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't in years, peace. Not the kind that comes from having everything perfect, but the kind that comes when you stop carrying what isn't yours anymore. I brewed myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and listened to the birds return for spring. The house was still. Not empty, just mine. For years, I believed being a good mother meant giving everything. Sacrificing without limits. But now I know. The best kind of love is not the one that gives endlessly. It's the one that knows when to hold on and when to let go. Emily was building her own life now. And I was finally free to live mine. Not as a rescuer, not as a financier, but as Amanda, a woman with wisdom, peace, and a little sewing class on Thursdays that made her feel 20 years younger. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end of this story. If there's one thing Amanda's journey teaches us, it's this. Love doesn't mean sacrificing yourself until there's nothing left. Real love includes boundaries, mutual respect, and the courage to choose peace, even when it means letting go. I'd love to know, what part of this story resonated with you the most? Was there a moment that reminded you of your own life, your own choices, or even your own strength? Please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice might be the light someone else needs today. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss the next one. We have many more stories coming. Stories of love, pain, redemption, and hope. Until next time, take care of yourself. And remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose you.